Mr. President, welcome back to Meet the Press. Thanks for having us to CGI America.
Thanks.
This is an important week in politics, a lot of primaries. And one of the things that we're noticing in our politics on the left and the right is surging populism. A real sense that folks have that government is not working, certainly not working for them, that the system is rigged against them. How would you lead through that at this moment?
Well, first of all, it's hard to argue that they're wrong. I mean, we've got, since the late 70s, the only period when each 20%, each quintile of the American economy has grown, we've grown together, was the 8 years I served. We worked on it. We had a deliberate strategy to develop shared prosperity. And people just feel like the system's rigged against them and they won't be rewarded for work. And so that inspires populism against the government. Since the late 70s, corporate culture and corporate law has been changing. When I went to law school in the early 70s, I'm old, we were taught that corporations had responsibilities to their constituents because they had benefits from the state, like limited liability. They owed more or less even responsibilities to their customers, their employees, their shareholders, and the communities of which they were part. Starting in the 70s, the shareholders got way up here and everybody else was left behind. And you literally have these activist shareholders now demanding that companies sell off profitable divisions and engage in antisocial behavior so they can get more money within a year. And people know that. They're not dumb. They know corporate revenues going to wages and benefits are the smallest percentage of total revenues in more than 50 years. So that's why there's populism on the left and the right.
But is there a responsibility for establishment politicians? It would include
Absolutely.
President Obama, who doesn't seem to be able to pierce through that. The populism seems to be getting worse and not better.
Well,
that anger worse and not better.
Yeah, but I think it's hard to dispute the fact that he has tried to work with the Congress. He agreed to $1 trillion in deficit reduction. He'd done a lot of things to, and the Senate Minority Leader, Mr. McConnell, said that when he got in, said the most important goal they had was defeating him, not getting anything done. So I think there may be something else he can do, but he's darn sure bent over backwards trying to do things with them. But that's the third part of this problem. There is, because there has been failure in government and failure in corporate America and the financial sector, there's populism on the left and the right. And the third part is that this sort of yearning in the center of the American political spectrum to get the show on the road again, to just do something. One of the reasons we have so many people who like coming to CGI is they think we may not solve every problem in the world, but when they leave here, we will have done something. Something will happen.
But is it harder to be a political figure who harnesses the benefit of government and can work with the private industry when there is such scrutiny, even about politicians of means, politicians' salaries, wealth, and whether they're credible on some of these questions?
No. You just have to be transparent, tell people the truth. And, you know, the great thing, reason I like the Chipotle example, I don't think most Americans resent somebody else doing well. They resent it if they're not getting a fair deal. Mm-hmm. And I think that they know that if you want to reduce inequality, you don't want to just tear off the top. You could reduce inequality by going to 100% poverty. Nobody wants that. They want the bottom to grow. They want the middle to grow. They want a different set of employment and education and other options available to people.
Do you understand some people who've been critical of Mrs. Clinton, Secretary Clinton, who initially had to explain talking about being dead broke coming out of the White House, or said in an interview that you all pay?
I might understand it differently than you do, Hal.
Yeah. Let me just
look. Let me politics. Everybody. One of the things that's a challenge for us is that somebody's always trying to change the subject. And the subject is, how can we get this economy going? How can it work? And one of the things that we forget is, she was joking about it the other day, half the time somebody asking a question couldn't even vote when I was president. And so you have to live in the moment, not with memory. It is factually true that we were several $1 million in debt. Everybody now assumes that what happened in the intervening years was automatic. I'm shocked that it's happened. I'm shocked that people still want me to come give talks. And I'm grateful.
But when you say you pay ordinary taxes, as Secretary Clinton did, say you, unlike other people who are really well off, who pay taxes maybe just off capital gains, can you understand as a political matter that could strike people as being out of touch?
Yeah, but she's not out of touch, and she advocated and worked as a senator for things that were good for ordinary people. And before that, all her life. And the people asking her questions should put this into some sort of context. I remember when we were in law school, she was out trying to get legal assistance for poor people. I remember she was working on believing in paid leave for pregnant mothers in the 1970s. So I think if you don't give the most adept answer to a question because you immediately remember what you felt like the day we left, as opposed to what it looks like to everybody else now who's having trouble, you can say, okay, I got to clean that up, which she did.
Right. The reaction, you think, bottom line before I move on, the reaction to this you think has been unfair?
No, I don't want to you get to decide what's fair. You get to decide we got First Amendment. What I'm saying is the debate's the wrong debate. You need to be able to show by their policies and their statements about current conditions how candidates of both parties across the spectrum feel about the central challenge of our time, which is the demise of the American dream and the loss of our leadership as the most successful middle-class country in the world. And the idea that now, I think I had the lowest net worth of any American president in the 20th century when I took office. But I still could have been tone deaf. And, now I don't, and we've got a good life, and I'm grateful for it. But we go to our local grocery store on the weekend. We talk to people in our town. We know what's going on. The real issue is, if you've been fortunate enough to be successful, are you now out of touch and insensitive to the agonizing struggles other people are facing? That's the real issue.
And the real issue you talk about as well is some of this pain people feeling in the middle class, the sense that the middle class, that the American dream is slipping away. I look at some of the numbers, 3.4 million Americans who have been out of work for 6 months plus. You have over 7 million who, by their own admission, are stuck in lower paying jobs, part-time jobs. How can a Democratic candidate for president, or what challenges would a Democratic candidate for president face running on the Obama economy?
Well, first of all, that's not what anybody should do. You should run on making it better. But he didn't cause the meltdown. The actions that his administration took kept it from being worse. And there had been a concerted effort to stop implementing his economic plan in the second term, so none of you have any idea whether they would have worked or not. Because anything he needed to do that required congressional action became the number one thing. I never will forget, in Virginia, the House of Delegates won't take the Medicaid expansion in spite of the fact that it'll give them 17,000 jobs, $850 million, and add $1 billion to the state budget over the next decade, according to the Republicans' own survey. And when asked why, the Speaker of the House said he had no intention of doing anything that would help the president. I mean, go figure. No, they tried to plan like, well, this is going to cost money for the budget. It didn't. So I think, we're living in a strange time. In the next...
But you don't lay this at Speaker Boehner at the Republicans uniquely, do you? I mean, do you really think it's their opposition to the president that has forced him to have such impediments to get the economy growing again?
No. We do have, keep in mind, the average crash takes 10 years to get over, has always. We got the jobs back in about 6 years. We now got to get the incomes up. I believe, let me just put it this way, I believe if the two branches had been working smoothly together and taking advantage of this time when interest rates were lower than inflation, to cut long-term spending liabilities, but invest now in modern infrastructure, we would be in a lot better shape. I think median wages would be going up. I think poverty would be going down. That is not what the Republicans believe. The Republicans believe government would it always mess up a two-car parade unless it's something they want to spend money on. And in Washington, I'm talking about. And they just wanted to cut everything and not invest any money in the things that at least I believe are important. Doesn't that bother you that South Korea has computer download speeds 4 times faster than ours? And that Google spends $1 billion in Kansas City to get their broadband up to snuff, and the whole of America is so desperate, and they know that our government won't invest in that infrastructure, so they go to Google, and Google says, okay, I'll do 45 more. Well, what about the whole rest of the country? We need to try to get back to working together again. No, I'm not blaming them entirely.
So what if
I mean, how can you tell me, Mr. McCarthy from California, I like him. The fellow that was just elected to Mr.
Kevin
Cantor's
McCarthy, yeah.
speech. Yeah, I like him. I had a great visit with him at the inauguration. So what's the first thing he does after he becomes the #2 guy in the House leadership? What is the very first thing he does? He changes his position on whether we're going to fund the Export-Import Bank. Because the conservative populists say, oh, that's just a Wall Street crony capitalism deal. That's not a Wall Street crony capitalism deal. That's a financing device that allows us to compete with the 60 other countries in the world who are trying to save jobs in their countries, and they help finance exports. So are we going to be competitive or not? If we can't even agree to do what's necessary to keep the job base we've got, it's hard to grow the economy. So let me just finish. We started this question is, I believe the next election should be fought over now what? That's what I think all elections should be. I think the 2014 election should be.
I want to ask you about global leadership in the world. Iraq is back, unfortunately. A terror threat from this group known as ISIS is back and perhaps poses the biggest threat we've seen to the West and to the United States since al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The former Vice President Dick Cheney said of President Obama in an op-ed that claims that al-Qaeda is decimated is clearly not true, that in fact al-Qaeda is on the march. The argument that America is less safe under President Obama. Do you believe Dick Cheney is a credible critic on these matters?
Well, I believe, if they hadn't gone to war in Iraq, none of this would be happening. So I think
it wouldn't be happening in Syria. There wouldn't be
well, it might be
terrorist
happening
actors.
in Syria, but what happened in Syria wouldn't have happened in Iraq. Iraq would not have been, in effect, drastically altered as it has been. But Mr. Cheney has been incredibly adroit for the last 6 years or so, attacking the administration for not doing an adequate job of cleaning up the mess that he made. And I think it's unseemly. And I give President Bush, by the way, a lot of credit for trying to stay out of this debate and letting other people work through it. But
can I ask you on that point, because you've become close with President Bush and you speak a lot around the country, he is so determined to stay out of the spotlight, much different than you in terms of speaking out and engaged. I mean, you're both engaged in good works around the globe. Do you think he has some responsibility as part of this President's Club to speak out on some of these issues that he cares a lot about? It could be immigration, it could be Iraq, it could be other areas.
I think that's just a decision every former president has to make.
Do you rib him a little bit and say, come on, get out there?
The only thing I rib him about is that Texas is one of the top 3 states, along with Minnesota and Iowa, in the percentage of their electricity they get from wind. and I point out, and it's because when George Bush was governor of Texas, he signed all these wind energy tax credits. And so we're talking, and hit me with some free market thing upside the head, and I said, you know, back in your proto-socialist phase, as governor of Texas, you made your state a double winner. You got the natural gas and you got to win electricity.
These are fighting words. You're just trying to get him off the bench and actually start commenting on something. Let me ask you this. One of the issues about America's role in the world is if we pursue a lighter footprint, going into places, intervening, then that which we leave behind can become chaotic. And so it becomes a question of what responsibility does the United States have to be part of that future of a country? Yeah. This goes to Iraq. I've always believed that is the larger question about Benghazi, but you understand the political question about Benghazi in many ways. Some have tried to make it about Secretary Clinton and her tenure. Rand Paul on the program, he may run for president in 2016, called it disqualifying for Secretary Clinton. You have a response for that?
Well, let's go back to the first question because it's serious. That's not a serious comment and doesn't deserve a serious question. Rand Paul, when 10 different instances occurred when President Bush was in office where American diplomatic personnel were killed in around the world, how many outraged Republican members of Congress were there? 0. When President Reagan, in an 18-month period, had 3 diplomatic attacks and the 241 Marines being killed in Lebanon in 18 months, one right after the other, and said that the last thing, when the CIA station chief was kidnapped, and the recommended changes from the other 2 things hadn't been taken, said, you know, it's like repairing your house. Sometimes they don't get it done on time. Can you imagine what the Republicans would do to Hillary if she'd said that? And what did the Democrats do? They had 1 congressional hearing, they recommended changes, and then they shut up. They did not turn this into a political thing. So everybody knows what this is. That's not serious. The serious question is the one you asked, the first one, which is, when you take office, whether somebody else did something right or not, you have to deal with America's position and America's interest and our values in a world with the mess you've got. And so the question, I think that the president has acknowledged that if we can help keep Iraq from being dismembered and taken over by, in the Sunni part, this ISIS group, we should, but it's a political thing too. Keep in mind, when the surge worked, and you covered it closely, I know, when the surge worked, it wasn't just because we sent more soldiers there, it's because the Sunnis were fighting with us against the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Why? Because the Al-Qaeda in Iraq had been radical, cut off a lot of tribal chiefs' heads, did all those terrible things. And what did they get for it? They didn't get included into this current Iraqi government. Then, a few months ago, the tribal leaders helped the government again. And what did they get for it? They didn't get included into the Iraqi government.
So why would they fight now unless they feel like they're going to?
Yeah, but we can't win without them. In other words, there is nothing we can do to rescue this situation all by ourselves. We can do a lot of good, but there has to be some agreement that if the Sunni tribal leaders rise one more time and fight one more time against the Sunni radicals, that in the end there will be an Iraq that is inclusive. It's like their version of what we want here with inclusive capitalism. Everybody wants to be a part of this. And I think that's the challenge that, you know, we face now. What do we do in Syria? What are our remaining options when we decided to, you know, not try to influence the outcome of that in the beginning, at least in a more direct way? We did give aid and training.
Do you worry this could become his Rwanda, Syria?
No. But I think what the American people need to do is to get used to the fact that power is more dispersed in the world today. And the good news is people like you can make more good things happen here. The bad news is, in a place where there's a lot of trouble, a few groups who can get their hands on a little money and some guns can make a lot of bad things happen. So it looks like it's concentrated if you just hang around your neighborhood. So when the Chinese, for example, build up their naval capacity, and we worry that they're not looking for multilateral diplomatic solutions to how the mineral riches of the South China Sea will be divided. We forget, that's a concentrated thing. When Russia goes into Crimea, that's their next door neighbor. But when you get around the world, power is increasingly dispersed, and the level of control goes down, and the opportunity for chaos goes up. And sometimes you just do the best you can with the options you got.
Can I do two quick ones before we get to the audience? One, most formidable Republican who could run for president in your judgment?
If I knew, I wouldn't say. Why would I encourage you? Unless
you're so good at handicapping that side, though.
Unless I thought it would cause that person to lose the nomination, then I'd announce it in a heartbeat.
And you're just a bit player as to whether Secretary Clinton runs?
That's exactly what I am. I'm a foot soldier in an army. I will do what I'm instructed to do. No, look, it's funny. You reach our age, you just look at it differently. We've had wonderful lives. We've been incredibly blessed. And we're looking forward to being grandparents. And I'm for it. I said in 2008, I said every chance anybody's given me, of all the people I've ever worked with, I think she's the most gifted public servant I've ever worked with. Even if we are married, that's what I believe. And I believed it when we were going out together. And I believed it when I asked her to marry me and she said no. Nothing's changed my opinion in more than 40 years. But it has to be her decision. And I agree with what she said. The most important thing is not do you want the job or can you win? The most important thing is why do you want the job and what do you propose to do if you get it? And how are you going to communicate that to the American people? That's the only thing that really matters.
We are in Denver. I got to ask this last question. Back in the 60s, there was that saying, give peace a chance. I'm wondering if you think now it's time to give pot a chance. Would it actually help government raise revenue and deal with some of the things you're dealing with here at CGI?
Rocky Mountain High? I think there's a lot of evidence to argue for the medical marijuana thing. I think there are a lot of unresolved questions and I think the general bipartisan decriminalization movement that's going on, beyond marijuana, just trying to reduce the size of imprisonment, get people that don't present an immediate danger out of prison and spend less money on that, more money on building people up. This is one area, by the way, where we might be able to have some real bipartisan progress in the Congress. Restoring voting rights to former felons. There's a very impressive amount of interest among the Republicans in this. I think it's genuine. And it's nationwide, so I think we ought to do that. But I think we should leave it to the states. This really is a time when there should be laboratories of democracy because nobody really knows where this is going. Are there adequate quality controls? There's pot and there's pot. There's what's in it? What's going to happen? There are all these questions. And I think that I like where it is now. If the state wants to try it, they can, and then they'll be able to see what happens.
All right, we're going to take a couple of questions. Thank you, Mr. President. Please state your name and ask your question for the President.
Good morning. Jennifer Friend with Project Hope Alliance. I am proud to be one of the commitment partners using education and re-engaging Americans as a tool to end generational homelessness. And I know in my role as a leader in the NGO community that it is quite apparent that the only way to make true and sustainable social and economic impact is when we do leverage relationships between the private, the public, and the NGO sector. And I know that we're all in the same culture here doing that. But when we leave, what do you see as being the largest impediment or barrier to us bringing that culture outside of CGI America? And how do we eliminate it so that we can truly change social issues such as poverty, undereducation, and homelessness?
I think we have to do a better job from Washington to Main Street everywhere and being in constant contact with people that we think we disagree with. I think, it's very interesting what all the social science research shows that kind of goes along with its economic problems that you were interviewing people about and that we had the discussion about. We are less racist, sexist, and homophobic than we used to be. Our one remaining bigotry seems to be that we just don't want to be around anybody we disagree with. We kind of want to hang with our crowd. And as you see all over the world, that can be a very dangerous tendency. And it's like it's a curse that never keeps on giving, stops giving. If you look at the Al-Shabaab people in Somalia come down and kill the people in the Christian community in Kenya. The Rohingya Muslims being persecuted in Myanmar. There's a story yesterday in the press about the Palestinian men who converted to Christianity and raced across the border to Afghanistan because they have a constitutional right to freedom of religion, and his Muslim brothers chasing him, says he's going to kill him when he finds him, then he's going to go kill his son because his son's illegitimate. His son's 3 years old. So the kind of differences we have here pale against the backdrop of what's going on in the world. And I think, there needs to be an organized way, community by community, that we all start meeting and working together all the time. Because we're not all that different, and we'll really wind up, a lot of us liking each other, and we'll wind up slowly over time, when your reserve melts away, you lose all your excuses for not doing anything. And I really don't think there is any other way. I noticed the former Republican congressman from South Carolina, Bob Inglis, who had a very conservative and lost his primary by more than 2-1 because in a long period of recuperation after a horrible injury in his home, he's a deeply religious man, and he said, I had an epiphany. I don't have to hate the president to disagree with him. He was born in America, not Kenya or Indonesia, and he was a Christian, not a Muslim. I can see he's a fine family man. I still disagree with him, but I think it's wrong for us to hate him. And he said, and I think my Senator Lindsey Graham's right about climate change. It's going on, so we need a market-based solution to handle it if we're conservatives. For those two sins, he lost the primary 2-1. But he's now meeting with the former Democratic congresswoman from South Carolina, and they meet, once a month, and they get people together that would otherwise not see each other, and they're trying to develop these networks of cooperation. And that's also true for sectors of the economy and other things. That's my best advice. There is no easy way to do this, but there is no alternative to it. It's just like you said, it is the only thing that is working anywhere. Broad-based cooperation. If they had done it in Iraq, Iraq would be functioning. If President Assad in Syria had been able to figure out how to empower all these groups in an orderly way, we would never have been through all this that we've been through. And how are Jordan and Lebanon surviving with all their stresses? Because they have the makings of, consensus decision-making against all the odds. I wish I had a better answer. That's what I think.
One more over here.
Good morning. I'm Leah Austin with the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley. And President Clinton, you've discussed, and of course Secretary Clinton has made a great commitment to child development and early childhood education, and talking about this as an intervention for children and supporting children's development, as well as a strategy to support parents as they go to work and that they can access middle-class jobs and keep those jobs and and be there while their children are someplace safe and stable. But the women who are doing this work, which is highly skilled work, are low-wage earners themselves. And given that we can't charge parents more for the services and still have it affordable, what can we do so that the women who are in these jobs, who are providing child development and early education, themselves don't have to worry about supporting their families and can be middle wage income earners themselves?
You can, if the government's funding it, you try to get the government pay scale up. And it's one of the reasons that I favor a substantial increase in the minimum wage, in spite of, you heard the little discussion we had here before, is that there really isn't much evidence that it costs employment as long as it's 50% of the median wage or lower. And that's about whatever that's been discussed, what is it, $10.10? That's about 50% of the median wage in most states. And so, and it bumps people who are just above it up. Any of the union members who are here, the labor unions always support raises in the minimum wage, and they have very few members who are affected by it, but it does affect their members who are just above it. So I don't think we just have to be willing to pay for it. Child care is the new teaching. You know, when I was a boy growing up, I had all these brilliant teachers who were women who didn't have other employment options. And they worked for nickels and dimes. And there were great teachers. And now women can get Carly Fiorina's job. So we have to pay our teachers better if you really want good teachers. And the same thing is true now with child care workers. There's going to be the real temptation to just take good-hearted people and underpay them. And we can't do it.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You okay?
Yeah.
Thanks.